The rain came down in long gray ropes over Ironwood Ranch, and Jisoo Kang sat on an overturned feed crate behind the barn with a tin plate balanced on her knees, cold beans going colder, cornbread already soaked through. Lamplight poured gold from the ranch house windows 40 feet away. Laughter and cutlery ringing faint through the storm. None of it meant for her. She bowed her head anyway, the way her mother had taught her over a warmer table on the other side of an ocean, and murmured a quiet word of thanks before she ate. Because gratitude, she had decided somewhere in the last 2 years, belonged to her and not to the weather. 2 years she had done this. Sun, snow, the day of Ellen Hutton's funeral, when even grief hadn't earned her a chair inside. Margaret Hutton had made the rule plain the first week. Hired girls of her kind ate where the ranch's guests did not have to look at them. And so, Jisoo had learned the particular geography of being unwanted, the exact dry patch behind the barn wall where the rain slanted less. Tonight, unnoticed by anyone in the lit windows, a rider had reined up at the tree line an hour early, road-worn and silent, watching a woman he did not yet recognize eat alone in his own rain. Caleb Hutton had been riding 22 days to get home, and for one long, breath-held minute he did not move at all, because nothing in that minute made sense to him. Not his mother's lit dining room, not the plate balanced on trembling knees 40 feet from a table with 2 empty chairs. Something old and buried shifted in his chest, a cellar door he had nailed shut years ago creaking open half an inch, and for a moment, he was not 34 and just returned, but somewhere far younger, somewhere colder, somewhere he had once promised himself he would never let another soul stand. He swung down from the saddle. He crossed the yard without his hat, without a word to the house, and crouched in the mud in front of her, close enough that she flinched. He did not ask why. He did not apologize for what he did not yet fully understand. He only asked her name, her real one. Slowly, like a man handling something he was afraid of breaking. And when she gave it to him, he said it back correctly on the first try. Tomorrow, he told himself, walking back toward a house full of people who owed him answers, there would be 2 plates on that table. He had no idea yet what that promise would cost him. Before Montana Territory, before the barn, before anyone called her Josie as though Jisoo were a name too heavy to lift, there had been a fishing village on Korea's southern coast, where her father's boat came home half empty for 3 seasons running, and a labor broker's promise had seemed, briefly, like mercy. 4 years of contracted service in America, the broker said, working off her father's debt to a shipping company that owned half the harbor, and in return, a wage sent home and a life afterward that was hers alone. Her mother had not wept at the dock, not where the broker's men could see weakness and change terms. But that night she had pressed a small bundle wrapped in indigo cloth into Jisoo's hands, a brass spoon and a pair of chopsticks that had belonged to her own mother before her. "Carry your name wherever the wind takes you," she had said, and Jisoo had carried it, through a harbor gate, up a gangplank, into a hold that smelled of salt and fear, toward a country she had only heard described in a broker's careful, unreliable English. The crossing took 6 weeks and cost her the last of her girlhood in ways no contract had written down. She learned English in fragments below decks from an old missionary's wife returning to Boston, learned please and thank you and I am sorry before she learned yes or no, and she practiced them into the dark like prayers. In San Francisco, a company agent matched contracts to households the way a man might match cattle to buyers, and Ironwood Ranch, Montana Territory, needed a girl strong enough for laundry, cooking, and whatever else a widowed rancher's mother required for 4 years, room and board included, wages held against the debt until the contract's end. Jisoo rode a train and then a wagon into country so wide and so empty of anything familiar that she stopped, twice simply to breathe it in before she understood that a place this beautiful could still refuse to want her. Margaret Hutton met her on the porch with a look that itemized her the way she might a delivery of lumber, found her adequate, and did not offer her hand. "Josie will do," Margaret said within the hour, because Jisoo was apparently too much trouble for an American mouth, and she said it the way she assigned rooms and chores as a fact already settled, rather than a question asked. Jisoo did not correct her. She had learned already in 6 weeks at sea and 3 days on trains that corrections from a woman like her cost more than they were worth. She was shown the kitchen, the wash house, the room off the pantry barely large enough for a cot, and the ranch hands who would expect their meals on time, regardless of weather or grief or the particular ache of being 19,000 miles from anyone who had ever said her real name with love in it. Margaret explained the household's order in short, complete sentences, the way one explains a machine to someone not expected to understand its purpose, only its function. And Jisoo understood that she had been placed somewhere beneath the hired hands, beneath the dogs that slept by the stove, in a category the ranch had not previously needed a word for. The rule arrived at supper time, plain and absolute. Ironwood's hired men ate at the long kitchen table, rough company but company, and Jisoo set the food before them, expecting, foolishly, some place among the empty chairs when the serving was done. Margaret's voice found her at the door before she could sit. "Your kind eats where the family's guests do not have to look at you," she said, not unkindly exactly, the way one states a fact of weather, and pointed with her chin toward the yard. Jisoo carried her own plate out past the wash line and the chicken coop to the flat dry patch behind the barn wall, found an overturned feed crate that would become, over 2 years, the only furniture she owned outright, and ate her first meal at Ironwood Ranch alone, under an open sky, while inside the house, forks rang against china, and nobody's absence was remarked upon at all. She did not cry that night either. She had already begun, without quite deciding to, the long practice of not crying where the wind could carry the sound back to the house. 2 years wore the practice into something like armor. She ate behind the barn through blizzards that numbed the tin plate to her palms and through summer dust storms that seasoned everything with grit. Through the spring, the creek flooded, and she balanced her supper on her knees, standing in mud to her ankles rather than miss the meal entirely, through the terrible gray afternoon of Ellen Hutton's funeral, when the whole county came to grieve a young wife and mother, and Jisoo cooked the funeral supper for 40 guests, and ate her own portion alone behind the barn, while the county's grief filled the house without her. She kept small rituals against the erosion, a word of thanks murmured before every meal, in Korean, low enough that the wind alone heard it. Her mother's brass spoon, kept wrapped in its indigo cloth in her apron pocket, even when the ranch's plain forks would have done. Touched once before, eating like a coin, rubbed for luck. A home song hummed under her breath on the coldest nights, 3 notes at a time, enough to remember the shape of a kitchen an ocean away without breaking apart from missing it. The one crack in 2 years of careful invisibility was a 6-year-old girl with her mother's pale hair and her father's watchful eyes, who had decided, sometime in her 4th year of motherless life at Ironwood, that Josie was the wrong name and Jisoo the right one, and had gone on using it in defiance of every adult correction. Abby Hutton found the barn crate by accident one autumn evening, trailing a barn cat she had been chasing, and instead of running back to the house, had simply sat down in the dirt beside Jisoo's boots and asked, with the total unself-consciousness only small children manage, why she ate outside when it was cold enough to see her breath. Jisoo had no honest answer that a 7-year-old should carry, so she gave her a dishonest one, that she liked the stars better than the ceiling, and Abby had accepted this with the serious nod of a child cataloging useful information, and came back the following week with a biscuit smuggled in her apron pocket, the first gift anyone at Ironwood had given her that cost the giver something. Caleb Hutton, the ranch's actual owner, and the only person whose word could have unmade the rule with a single sentence, was rarely home to hear it spoken. He had buried his wife Ellen 2 winters back, fever taking her in 11 days that still replayed themselves behind his eyes some nights, and the house afterward had felt to him less like shelter than like evidence. Every room holding some specific absence he could not yet stand to walk past twice in one day. He took every drive, every horse-breaking contract, every excuse Montana territory offered a rancher to sleep under open sky instead of his own roof, and left Ironwood's daily order to his mother the way a man leaves a house key with a neighbor he trusts without examining too closely, telling himself the arrangement was temporary, telling himself grief owed him this much absence, never once imagining that his mother's particular notion of propriety had drawn a line through his own dining room that placed a living, breathing person on the wrong side of it, in the rain, under his name. The worst of it came in January, a blizzard that dropped the temperature to a number the hands stopped repeating aloud, and Margaret did not suspend the rule for weather any storm had yet managed to produce. Jisoo ate that night in 11 minutes flat, forcing down stew already skinning over with cold, her fingers gone past aching into a flat white numbness she recognized, distantly, as dangerous. She made it back to her narrow room off the pantry and did not entirely remember doing so. Abby found out 3 days later, from a hand who mentioned it carelessly, and marched into the kitchen with a quilt from her own bed dragging behind her, declaring she would sleep outside too if Josie had to eat there, until Margaret, horrified at the scene in front of the hired men, swept her granddaughter back upstairs with sharp words that did not, notably, extend to changing anything about where Jisoo ate. Jisoo found the quilt folded neatly on her crate the next evening anyway, left by small hands that had not asked anyone's permission, and used it for a month before Margaret noticed and had it returned to the house. Hollis Pratt, Ironwood's foreman, enforced the household's finer points with the particular thoroughness of a man who had nothing of his own to be proud of. On the worst nights, he watched from the bunkhouse porch to be sure Jisoo did not slip inside the barn's wide door for shelter from wind that cut sideways, and twice he caught her there, plate balanced on a hay bale just inside the threshold, and sent her back out with a few flat words about rules being rules and not his to bend for anybody's comfort. He was not, in his own accounting, a cruel man. He simply enjoyed, in the narrow way certain men do, being the one who got to decide where the line fell. And Jisoo had learned that arguing with Hollis Pratt cost the same as arguing with Margaret Hutton, only faster and with less dignity attached to the loss. She stopped trying the barn door. She found instead a gap in the wall's lowest boards where a knot of wood had rotted loose, enough to block perhaps one gust in 4, and called that, in her own private accounting, a victory. Word came on a Tuesday that the herd had been sold 3 weeks early, and a lame lead horse had ended the drive at the rail depot in Miles City, rather than the range camp everyone expected, and that Caleb Hutton would be home inside a week. Margaret received the news with visible relief and immediate strategy. The household folded into a flurry of scrubbing and airing rooms and pressing linens that had not seen this much attention since Ellen's funeral. She found Jisoo in the wash house on the second morning of preparations and delivered, in the mild and terrible tone she reserved for her most absolute instructions, a warning dressed as advice. Keep to her place, more carefully than ever, while the master of the house was watching, because whatever leniencies a foreign hired girl might imagine she had earned in his absence would not survive his mother's correction in front of him. Jisoo said nothing, only nodded, and went back to scrubbing linens for a homecoming. She had no reason to expect would change one single thing about her own particular geography of unwant. He rode the last stretch into a falling evening rain that had been building since noon, glad of it in a distant way since 22 days of dust made a man grateful for anything wet that was not sweat. He thought, as Ironwood's fence line finally came into view, of Ellen's grave on the low rise east of the house, which he would visit at first light and not before, because arriving in darkness and mud felt like the wrong condition in which to greet her. He thought of Abby, 7 now, growing in ways a father learned about secondhand when he was gone this often, and made himself a private promise, the kind he had broken before, to stay closer to home through calving season at least. He did not think, riding those last exhausted miles, about his mother's household rules, because in 11 years of trusting her with Ironwood's daily order, he had never once had cause to wonder whether trust had been the right thing to leave unexamined. He reined up at the tree line where the ranch road bent toward the yard, meaning only to look a moment at the lit windows of a house he had missed more than he generally allowed himself to admit, and that was when he saw her. Rain sheeted off his hat brim in a steady curtain, and his horse shifted restlessly beneath him, impatient for the warm barn it could already smell, but Caleb did not urge it forward. A woman he did not recognize sat on an overturned crate in the open rain behind his own barn, a plate balanced on her knees, 40 feet from a dining room glowing gold and full of a family eating supper without her. For one long, breath-held minute he simply did not move at all, because nothing about the scene assembled itself into anything he could make sense of, standing in his own rain, on his own land, under his own name, home not 20 minutes, and already looking at something that felt less like a stranger's misfortune than an old wound reopening somewhere behind his ribs before he could even name it. Then the cellar door in his chest, nailed shut for over 20 years, creaked open half an inch on its rusted hinge, and he swung down from the saddle before he had finished deciding to. He found his mother in the parlor after Jisoo had gone to bed, still road dirty, still dripping onto the good rug in a way that would have earned any of the hands a scolding, and he did not raise his voice, which she would later tell people was somehow worse than if he had. He asked her plainly, how long, and she answered him just as plainly, 2 years, with the flat confidence of a woman who had never once considered the answer might require defending itself. She explained the propriety of it at some length, the buyers and bankers who came to Ironwood's table twice a season, and the talk that would follow if they ever found a foreign hired girl sitting among them, the reputation a ranch carried into every contract it signed long before the cattle were counted. Caleb listened to the whole explanation without once interrupting, hat still in his hands, water pooling slowly at his boots, and when it was finished he told her, in a voice gone very quiet and very final, that whatever reputation Ironwood had built on that arrangement was about to change, starting tomorrow morning at first light, and that she was more than welcome to explain the new order to the bankers herself, in whatever words she found comfortable. He was in the kitchen before dawn, setting 2 plates at the long table with his own hands, an ordinary domestic task the household had not seen him perform since before Ellen died, and when Jisoo came in half asleep to start the morning's bread, she found the ranch's owner already standing at a table set carefully for 2, waiting for her the way no one at Ironwood had ever waited for her before. Neither of them said very much at first. He asked her to sit, plainly, and she did, carefully, slowly, as though the chair itself might still turn out to be a test she could fail, glancing once toward the yard, as if the rule might come find her indoors too. They ate eggs and bread together in a silence that was not comfortable yet, exactly, but was, for the first time in 2 years, warm rather than merely tolerated. Abby found them there 20 minutes later, hair still sleep-tangled, and did not ask a single question about any of it, only climbed straight into the 3rd chair as though it had always belonged to her, which, in the way that mattered most, it had.
Margaret did not appear at breakfast that morning, nor the next, nor for most of a week after that, taking her meals instead on a tray in her room with the particular martyred dignity of a woman making certain her absence was noticed by everyone in the household except the one person it was actually meant to punish. She began within days a quieter campaign among the hands and the kitchen help. A raised eyebrow here, a comment about standard slipping there, careful never to contradict her son directly to his face, but thorough in making certain the household understood that something at Ironwood had gone wrong, and that the wrongness wore a Korean face and answered still to the name Josie in every mouth but Caleb's and Abby's. Jisoo felt the shift in a dozen small unkindnesses that never quite rose to the level of an actual complaint. Cold water left standing for her washing, her mending set aside last. On the pile, though it had come in first, and understood, scrubbing a collar by lamplight, that Caleb's 2 plates had bought her a seat at the table, and very little peace to go along with it. The bunkhouse had its own steady commentary, delivered where Caleb could not hear it, and Jisoo, moving through the yard on her daily rounds, generally could hear every word of it clearly. Hollis Pratt led it without ever quite crossing into language a man could actually be fired for saying. A joke about hired help getting notions above their proper station. A comment about the boss going soft, since the drive ended, dropped just loudly enough at the wash trough or the tack shed to reach her clearly, without technically being aimed her way at all, so that no complaint could ever quite stick. She learned to carry water and feed and folded linens through the ranch yard, with her eyes fixed forward and her shoulders deliberately set, the same practiced invisibility she had worn behind the barn for 2 long, cold years. Except now the old unwont followed her indoors too, thinner and quieter than before, but no less present for all that. A draft finding every gap, the new arrangement had not yet managed to seal properly, no matter how many plates sat on the kitchen table each morning. It was over a supper in late September that he asked, for the first time, about the small brass spoon she touched before every meal, a habit he had noticed and said nothing about for weeks. She told him, in English, that had grown steadier by the day, since she had stopped having to guard every word, for fear of costing her something, about her mother at the dock, about the indigo cloth, about a promise that it would carry her name wherever the wind chose to take her. He listened the way she had noticed he listened to very little else, without interrupting, without reshaping her story into something more comfortable for himself. And when she finished, he said her name, Jisoo, correctly, the way he had said it that first rainy night, and she found she no longer flinched to hear it. Somewhere in the telling, she had also, without planning to, corrected his pronunciation of a Korean word for the first time, gently, and he had repeated it back until he got it right. And something in that small exchange felt to both of them like a door finally swinging the correct direction. Silas Crane rode over from his own spread in October to talk cattle prices ahead of the winter shipping contracts, and stayed on for supper at Caleb's invitation, a broad, loud man who ran the largest outfit in the county and had confident opinions about nearly everything that touched it, including, apparently, other men's households. He noticed Jisoo at the table within his first minute in the room, eyebrows lifting a fraction before he composed his face, and made his opinion of her presence known soon after with a comment about hired girls sitting above their raising, delivered with a broad laugh, clearly meant to fold the whole table into agreeing with him without anyone having to say so out loud. Nobody laughed. Margaret's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Jisoo kept her eyes fixed steadily on her plate, an old and thoroughly practiced stillness she had perfected long before this table existed, while across from her, Caleb's jaw set in a way Abby, watching closely from her own chair, had already learned to recognize as trouble arriving quietly, without raised voices, the way it usually did in this house now. Caleb set down his fork with a deliberateness that carried its own considerable weight, the small sound of metal against china louder in the sudden quiet than it had any right to be. Anne told Silas Crane, plainly in front of his mother and his daughter and the woman in question, that Jisoo Kang sat at his table because he himself had decided it, and that any man who wanted Ironwood's cattle business going forward would find a way to sit at the same table without further comment on the subject, tonight or any night after. Crane's face went through several colors in quick succession before he managed a stiff, unconvincing apology that satisfied precisely no one at the table, finished his meal in near total silence, and left considerably earlier than planned, without the deal he had actually ridden over to discuss in the first place. It was the first time anyone outside Ironwood's own fences had watched Caleb choose her openly over easier, more profitable company, and word of it, Caleb understood clearly, even as Crane's wagon rattled off down the darkening road, would reach every corner of town long before he himself did. Margaret's fury, when it came, arrived cold rather than loud, which Caleb had learned over 34 years to fear more. She reminded him, in the parlor that night, of a fact he had apparently forgotten in his enthusiasm for reordering the household. Jisoo's labor contract, signed at the San Francisco agency 2 years prior, had been executed in Margaret's name as head of household affairs, not his, and remained hers to administer for 2 more years, including, should she choose, the option to transfer it elsewhere. Silas Crane, she mentioned, almost idly, had a standing need for kitchen help on his own spread, and would very likely take the contract off Ironwood's hands entirely, given the trouble it seemed to be causing. She did not say she would do it. She only let the possibility sit in the room like a loaded gun set gently on the table between them, and went to bed, leaving her son to consider, alone, exactly how much power he did not yet have over the woman he had just publicly claimed to protect. The ultimatum arrived 3 days later, delivered evenly over a breakfast. Margaret finally deigned to attend after nearly a week absent from that table entirely. She had spoken with Silas Crane. She informed the table at large as though remarking on nothing more consequential than the weather, and he remained perfectly willing to take on Jisoo's remaining contract, generous terms given the circumstances, effective within the month unless certain unspecified adjustments were made promptly to how Ironwood conducted its household affairs going forward. She did not specify which adjustments. She did not need to. Everyone at the table understood exactly what was being asked and of whom. Jisoo sat through the entire announcement with her mother's brass spoon gripped so tightly beneath the table's edge that it left a small mark in her palm she would not notice until hours later, scrubbing pots alone, understanding with a clarity that made the eggs on her plate suddenly impossible to look at, that she had spent 2 years as unwanted furniture in this house and might now spend 2 more as a weapon, aimed deliberately at the one man who had finally, at real cost to himself, set her a proper place. Caleb rode out to the county seat the following morning before the sun had properly cleared the ridge, and returned the same evening saddle-sore and dust-caked with papers Margaret had never authorized and could not, once witnessed and formally filed with the county clerk, undo by any means available to her. He had gone straight to the agency's regional office, tracked down the original contract among a cabinet of similar documents, and purchased its remaining 2 years outright in his own name, a transaction considerably more expensive than he let anyone see him flinch over, converting Jisoo, in the space of 1 long afternoon, from his mother's hired girl into simply his own. He told Jisoo himself that evening, quietly, standing in the kitchen with the papers still in his coat, that the choice of whether to stay on at Ironwood under those new terms or to have the whole contract dissolved entirely, her remaining debt considered settled, belonged to her now. Not to Margaret, not to Silas Crane, not to anyone alive, but her, and that he would abide by whichever she chose without a single word of argument. Jisoo, who had not been offered a genuine choice about anything at all, since a fishing village 3 seasons short on catch, found she needed a full silent minute before she could answer him. Margaret's response to the transaction, when she finally learned of it that same night from a hand who could not resist mentioning it, was not shouting, but something colder and altogether more surgical, delivered with a precision that told Caleb she had been composing it for hours. She told her son, in the flattest voice he had ever heard her use in 34 years, of hearing every register she possessed, that Ellen would be ashamed to see what he had made of her house and her daughter's home. A woman she had genuinely, deeply loved, now paraded as the excuse for handing legal authority over a hired girl's entire life to himself, like some kind of frontier lord settling accounts. It was, Caleb would recognize only much later, lying awake with it, the single cruelest thing his mother had ever said to him in his life, precisely engineered to land where it would do the most possible damage. And it did land, though he was careful not to let her see the wound actually take. He only told her, evenly, that he would rather Ellen be ashamed of him for one difficult decision than have his own daughter grow up believing the rule that had governed this house for 2 years was in any way an acceptable one to carry forward. She found him at the corral 3 evenings later, working a young horse in the last of the light, and asked him the question she had been turning over since the papers were filed. Why? Not why he had bought the contract, which he had already half explained, but why any of it, the plates, the argument with Crane, a transaction that had cost him a fortune and clearly cost him something with his mother that ran deeper than money. He did not answer right away, which she had learned by now meant the answer mattered to him more than his easy ones did. And when he finally spoke, it was not really an answer at all, only an admission that he was not entirely sure himself, that something about the sight of her behind that barn had reached backward into a part of him he generally kept the door locked on, and that he owed her the actual reason, just not tonight. Not standing in a corral with the light going. He told her 2 nights later, over a supper, Abby had been sent to bed early at his quiet request, about a man named Everett Bragg, his mother's second husband, who had run Ironwood through Caleb's 13th clear through his 16th years, with a discipline that had nothing remotely gentle in it. Bragg had a particular punishment reserved for a boy who talked back, or worked too slow, or simply irritated him on any given evening for reasons that changed without warning, and it involved a tin plate in the tool shed standing behind this very barn, eaten alone in whatever weather the season happened to offer, for as many nights running as Bragg judged the lesson still needed reinforcing. Caleb had eaten more suppers alone in the cold as a boy than he had ever told another living soul before tonight. Not Ellen, not anyone. And his mother, he said, his voice gone very level and careful as he said it, had known every single time it happened, and had never once, not once in 3 years, intervened on his behalf. There had been one January night in particular, he told her, staring at the lamp rather than at her face while he said it, 12 years old, and so cold his hands had stopped answering him properly, no matter how hard he flexed them, when he had made himself a private promise sitting on an overturned crate, not unlike the one she had been using for 2 years without his knowledge, that if he ever had real power in this house again, actual power, nobody eating supper under his name would ever again have to do it alone in the cold, while the rest of the family ate warm 20 feet away behind glass. He had mostly forgotten the promise by the time he was grown and running the ranch himself, buried it the way a man buries most things from 13, that he would rather not carry around daily, until the night he rode home in the rain, exhausted, and found it standing right there in front of him again, wearing a face he had not been remotely ready to see, proving beyond any argument that he had broken a vow to himself for 2 full years running without even knowing it. Winter settled into something almost gentle after that, in the particular hard-won way such things sometimes manage. Suppers at the long table became the fixed, dependable point of every single day, Abby narrating her lessons in exhaustive detail, Caleb quieter, but steadily present rather than absent on some drive, Jisoo's English now steady enough by December to carry a joke of her own, rather than merely survive other people's jokes made at her expense. One evening, hearing Hollis Pratt described in passing as a man who could not find water in a rainstorm, she offered, with a perfectly straight face that fooled no one at the table, that perhaps he could find it well enough. He simply preferred complaining about the search first, at length, and the beat of silence before Caleb's laugh broke loose was, to her ear, one of the finest sounds Ironwood's kitchen had ever managed to produce in 2 long years. Abby demanded she repeat the joke 3 more times before bed that night, delighted, and Jisoo understood, turning down the lamp much later, that she had somewhere in the last 2 months stopped merely surviving this house entirely and started, cautiously, actually living inside it. It was a small thing. The evening it changed, small enough that neither of them could have named the exact moment afterward if pressed to. Passing the breadbasket down the table, as they had done 100 times by now, his hand found hers a half-second longer than the actual bread required, fingers brushing, and neither of them pulled away as quickly as either surely would have a month earlier, when caution was still the whole shape of the arrangement between them. Abby, 7, and missing absolutely nothing that happened at that table, looked between them with the frank, unhurried assessment of a child, quietly cataloging new and interesting information, said nothing at all about it, and simply smiled down at her own plate in a way that made both adults suddenly, urgently interested in their suppers. Neither Caleb nor Jisoo spoke of it that night, or the next, or the one after that. But the breadbasket from that evening forward seemed to require passing rather more often than strictly necessary at any given meal. Cedar Hollow's collective opinion of Ironwood Ranch, meanwhile, had been fermenting for weeks now, on a steady diet, supplied largely by Silas Crane's wounded pride, and Margaret's careful, always deniable comments dropped at church socials and quilting circles alike. The story traveled the way such stories always do in a small county, gaining fresh detail with every single telling, until the version circulating widely by November had Caleb Hutton actively disgracing his dead wife's memory, thoroughly bewitched by a foreign hired girl who had somehow, through means never quite specified, talked her way into legal ownership of half the ranch itself. It was a version so far removed from anything resembling the actual truth that Jisoo, hearing a garbled fragment of it secondhand from a delivery boy at the mercantile counter, did not immediately know whether to laugh out loud at the sheer invention of it or be genuinely frightened by how far it had already traveled and settled in the end. Standing there with her basket half filled on something closer to plain tired, the invitation to Cedar Hollow's harvest supper arrived the last week of November, as it did every year. The whole county's largest communal gathering, held in the Grange Hall, with a single long table pieced together from borrowed planks, and set to seat easily 80 people at once. Margaret informed Caleb over supper, with the settled air of a woman closing a matter already beyond discussion in her own mind, that Jisoo would naturally stay home that evening to mind the house, that bringing her along would finish in one single public evening, whatever standing the family had left anywhere in town. Caleb listened to the entire argument through, without interrupting once, said nothing in response for a long, considering moment, and then told his mother and Jisoo and Abby, all 3 at the same time, that they would be attending the harvest supper together, as a family sits together at any table, and that whatever the evening ultimately cost them, all of them would find out its true price together, rather than any one of them guessing at it apart. Jisoo lay awake most of that night, less afraid of the county's judgment than of hoping, after 2 long years of careful practice at not hoping, that this time it might actually hold. The Grange Hall was lit gold and packed close with families Jisoo recognized by sight from 2 years of mercantile errands and church suppers she had never once been invited inside for, and the whole room's noise dropped a clear half register the moment the Ironwood party came through the door together, all 4 of them, in a way no one there had ever seen them arrive before. She felt every single eye that found her and stayed a beat too long, felt Abby's small hand find hers without being asked, felt Caleb's hand settle briefly and deliberately at the small of her back, not possessive exactly, just present. A public fact stated plainly without a single spoken word needed to make it clear to anyone watching. Margaret walked a careful pace ahead of them, chin held high, performing an ease Jisoo strongly suspected she did not remotely feel underneath it, and together the 4 of them crossed the crowded hall toward the long communal table, where 100 private opinions, some kind, most not, waited patiently to become one loud public one before the night was through. They had barely taken their seats and unfolded their napkins, when a stout woman Jisoo recognized immediately as one of Margaret's own church circle leaned across two chairs, smiling the particular bright smile certain women reserve for their cruelest moments in public settings, and informed the table at large, pleasantly, that hired help traditionally ate at the side tables set up near the kitchen, gesturing with two fingers toward a shorter, plainer table pushed apart near the doorway, and reached as if to settle the whole matter herself before anyone else could object, directly for Jisoo's plate. It was, Jisoo understood with sudden clarity in the half-second before anyone else in the hall moved, precisely the same sentence Margaret had delivered 2 years earlier in a kitchen doorway, dressed now in church social politeness and pleasant smiles, but aimed at exactly the same target, the old barn rule following her indoors and out into public one final time to see quite deliberately whether it still held any weight at all. Caleb's hand closed firmly over the plate a half-second before the woman's fingers actually reached it, gently but entirely, immovably final, and he said, into a hall that had gone very quiet, very fast, every conversation at every table dying at once, that Jisoo Kang sat exactly where his family sat, tonight and every single night going forward from here, and that anyone in this hall who found the arrangement objectionable was more than welcome to say so, to him directly, to his face, rather than to a woman carrying roughly half their own courage on her behalf. He did not raise his voice above a normal speaking tone at any point. He did not need to. The hall's own stretching silence did the rest of the work for him, long enough and heavy enough that the stout woman finally withdrew both her hand and her comment together and sat back down slowly with a face that would not soon forget the quiet correction she had just received in front of 80 of her neighbors. The actual cost arrived within the week, precisely as Margaret had warned it eventually would, though it came not from Silas Crane, who had at least the residual sense to stay quiet after his earlier humiliation at that same table. It came instead from a cattle buyer out of Miles City who had done steady business with Ironwood for the better part of a decade, and who now, with vague and thoroughly unconvincing excuses about shifting market conditions, took his considerable contract elsewhere without further explanation, and from a rancher 2 spreads over who had once counted Caleb among his closer friends, and now, somehow, always found reasons not to be home whenever Caleb happened to ride past that way. Caleb absorbed both losses without any visible complaint in front of anyone at all, though Jisoo, watching him work through the ledger math alone at the kitchen table one night by low lamplight, his face unreadable, understood exactly how much the town's good opinion had actually been worth to him in real terms, and how deliberately, knowingly, he had spent every bit of it anyway. What surprised Jisoo most, in the weeks that followed, was Margaret herself, who grew noticeably quieter rather than angrier after the harvest supper, caught more than once simply standing motionless at the kitchen window, with an expression Jisoo had no ready name for, somewhere between old buried grief and something closer to genuine shame. She found her one evening out at the barn's old tool shed, empty and unused now for years, running one weathered hand slowly along its inside wall as though checking for a cold she remembered still in her own fingers, rather than the room's actual temperature that night. Though Margaret said nothing at all to Jisoo about what exactly she was looking for in that shed, Jisoo understood anyway, with a sudden lurch of understanding that quietly reordered 2 full years of resentment into something far more complicated than she had allowed herself to feel before. That Margaret had known precisely what that shed had cost a 13-year-old boy once, long ago, and had let it happen regardless, and was only now, watching her own son's entire reputation burn steadily for a stranger, finally sitting alone with what that old silence had actually meant. The true turning point, though, came at the church's Christmas gathering 3 weeks later, when a different woman, considerably less bold than the first, but carrying the exact same old assumption underneath her polite phrasing, asked Jisoo directly, in front of a small, attentive cluster of listeners gathered near the punch table, how much longer she intended to go on taking advantage of a grieving widower's evident kindness toward her. Jisoo, who 2 full years earlier would have simply swallowed the question whole along with the insult riding quietly inside it, set down her cup instead, unhurried, and answered in English that had long since stopped needing anyone's patience or permission, that she had buried no one's kindness whatsoever, and had taken nothing at all that had not been offered freely and repeatedly by a grown man fully capable of deciding his own table for himself. and that she would be perfectly glad to discuss the matter further with anyone willing to say it to her face directly, rather than around her at a distance. The small cluster went very quiet indeed, and then, unexpectedly, one older woman standing at the edge of it laughed out loud in open, delighted approval, and something in the whole room's temperature shifted noticeably for good that evening. They rode home from the Christmas gathering with Abby asleep between them, and the sky gone clear and hard with stars, and Caleb told her, low enough not to wake his daughter, that he was sorry for what the last months had cost her on top of everything 2 years had already cost her. Jisoo considered the apology for a moment, and then set it gently aside, telling him that she had not stayed at Ironwood these past months because a contract obligated her to, since he himself had offered to dissolve it and let her go free the day he bought it, but because she had chosen to, deliberately, with her whole clear mind, and that a woman who had crossed an ocean to escape one set of terms imposed on her without asking was not interested in being rescued into a second set she had not chosen either. He was quiet a moment, and then said simply that he understood and that he was glad, and that he loved her, plainly, for the first time, under a sky wide enough to hold it. Margaret's apology, when it finally came in January, was not eloquent and did not pretend for one moment to be. She found Jisoo alone in the kitchen early one morning, before the household was properly awake, set 2 things down on the table, without any preamble at all: an old pocket watch that had belonged to Thomas Hutton, Caleb's late father, and a full-place setting. She laid herself carefully, by her own hand, at the table's long empty 4th chair, and told her, in a voice with none of its old familiar flatness left inside it, that she had been wrong for considerably longer than she had ever found the courage to say all at once. Wrong about the rule, wrong about the shed. Everett Bragg had once used on her own son, while she stood by silently and let him. Wrong about a great many other things, besides that she fully intended to spend whatever years she had left making some real kind of peace with. It was not, Jisoo understood clearly watching her, a complete or instant healing by any measure. It was simply a place set honestly at a table, which under these particular circumstances amounted to its own quiet kind of miracle. Winter thinned slowly into spring, and spring into the ranch's busiest working season, and Ironwood's overall reputation in Cedar Hollow settled gradually into something neither fully restored to what it once was, nor permanently ruined either. A middle ground most families learn, eventually to live comfortably inside. The Miles City cattle buyer never did return to Ironwood's books, and the once friendly rancher, 2 spreads over, remained cordial enough in passing, but kept a careful distance, in the particular way of men who have quietly decided a subject is better left entirely unrevisited between them. These were costs Caleb noted plainly and accepted without ever once suggesting, even privately to Jisoo, that the price had not been worth paying in full. But other doors opened too, doors that had been firmly closed before. Families who quietly began greeting Jisoo by her real name at the mercantile counter without prompting, a school teacher who asked gently whether she might be willing to help the younger children with their sums, given how remarkably far her own English had come in under a year. Small proofs, gathered one at a time, that some ground, once genuinely lost, does eventually grow back, slowly, in patches, provided a person keeps standing on it long enough. In April, on a warm, clear afternoon, he had apparently been planning for weeks without mentioning it to anyone. Caleb took apart the old feed crate behind the barn with his own 2 hands, its boards gone soft and gray with 2 full winters of rain and cold, and built from the best of that salvage wood, plus a little new lumber. Besides, something entirely different, a proper bench with a curved back and sanded arms, set not behind the barn any longer, where no one would see it, but directly beneath the kitchen window instead, where the morning light reached it first every single day. He did not make any kind of speech about it when he finally showed her. He simply told Jisoo, standing beside the finished bench on a clear spring evening with sawdust still on his sleeves, that a place ought to remember what actually happened there, and that he would rather this particular patch of ground remember somebody finally being seen and chosen than remember what it had once cost her not to be. And when she pressed her mother's small brass spoon briefly against the new pale wood, an old private ritual quietly finding itself a new place to live, he understood, without either of them needing to say the word out loud yet, that he had just watched her plant something. She planted a mugunghwa beside the new bench that very same week, a seed carried carefully all the way from a Chinese grocer's small shop in Miles City, who had in turn sourced it specially from a supplier down in San Francisco. After months of Jisoo patiently asking, writing letters, waiting for word, a rose of Sharon, her own country's flower, chosen quite deliberately for a patch of ground that had once meant only exile and cold, lonely suppers eaten alone. Abby helped her dig the small hole, entirely solemn about the seriousness of the responsibility involved, small hands careful in the dirt, and Margaret, watching quietly from the kitchen window with the pocket watch she now wore openly on a ribbon at her throat, came out unbidden after a moment to help firm the soil around the young roots with her own weathered hands. An old woman and a young girl, and the woman both of them had, in their different ways and their very different timing, finally chosen to make lasting room for, all three working together in dirt that had, not so long ago, absorbed 2 full years of somebody else's reign. By the following autumn, the mugunghwa had taken root well enough to bud, and the table inside Ironwood's kitchen had long since stopped needing anyone to count its plates, since it was simply understood, the way weather or seasons are understood, that Jisoo Kang ate every meal exactly where she chose to sit, which was usually beside Caleb, with Abby across from them narrating whatever her day had contained, and Margaret at the 4th chair she had claimed for herself back in January, and never once relinquished since. The brass spoon still traveled in Jisoo's apron pocket, though these days it came out mostly for show, for Abby's requests to see it, for the particular pleasure of a promise fully kept rather than merely carried. On quiet evenings, Jisoo still walked out past the kitchen window sometimes, past the bench and the young flowering bush beside it, and looked back at a lit house with 2 plates, then 3, then 4, set at one single table, and let herself simply stand in the fact of it, wanted exactly where she was.